So I think officially like to, do I have to say I'm calling this meeting to order?
Yes, please.
All right, I'm gaveling the table. I'm calling this meeting to order. First, I want to thank everybody that showed up today. I want to make sure that before we get started, that I thank all of our staff, the staff that has been working on the different charter school and alternative school things that we've got going. There's a lot of good things coming up, which you're going to hear about here just shortly. And I just wanted to take a moment before we begin, because we always just jump right into business and we go right down the list. But I want to take a moment and set a precedent that says I want to appreciate all of the people working on all the various things that we're working on. Because without you guys doing all the hard work that you're doing, it would be almost impossible to move this ship. So I want to publicly pause and just say thank you. We don't show gratitude enough. We don't show appreciation enough. So I want to thank each and every one of you. I will also want to make sure that I send a huge shout out to our student rep, who has been tirelessly trying to connect with me to get me and the rest of us on the same page, and his commitment to want to see charter schools and alternative schools reflect our communities, and to ensure that that we're being intentional about what it is we're saying we want to do with them. So I wanted to take a moment to also intentionally pause and say thank you to Oscar, our student rep. And to both Amy and Ailey and Erica and Kareem. I'm not going to go down the line, but I feel like it's important, especially in this day and age, in this time, that we appreciate our team members and the people that we're doing life with. And so with that being said, I'm going to pass this over to Karina, who will help us to facilitate the rest of this meeting.
Thanks for that, Herman.
Thank you for that. Do you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, now it's not letting me share my. Now it's not letting me share my screen. Structure. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So, welcome everyone. Thank you, Director Green. I'm echoing now. Thank you, Director Green, and Director Constant, and Director Lowry, and Student Representative Calvert. Really excited to join everybody today. And I just would start, I'll go over the agenda in just a second, but I actually would ask that Dr. Fast Buffalo Horse has agreed to read the land acknowledgement to start us off in a good way.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve students and families representing more than 150 different tribal nations, including the descendants of the local nations of the Chinook, Kathlamet, Multnomah, Kalapuya, Clackamas, Cowlitz, Molalla, and Tualatin. It's our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization and genocide on all of our students, and make visible the multitude of Native families and many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. In addition to acknowledging the land and those who have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa, whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can all begin to heal.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was very powerful. So for today's agenda, just kind of briefly, We have some great data and some good information that we want to share. And so we're going to start with an overview, just a reminder, and then kind of an overview of our alternative education system. And then share some graduation data. There's been some questions around our graduation data, so we wanted to share some of that information. And then in looking at how our system works together, one of the big pieces of our alternative education system is our student re-engagement work. And so we're very excited that we'll have a presentation from Reconnection Services from Lisa Higgins, and then we'll have public comment. That is our time together. So, as many people know, multiple pathways to graduation. We say where every student is welcome, wanted, and worthy. And so it has for many years been the safety net of the district. So prior to being called multiple pathways to graduation, it was called Ed Options. Just in alignment with some of our state compliance and state statutes around offering various options for students to meet students where they are. And so that's been our work as a system. And so as a system, what we really have focused on holistically is prevention, intervention, and re-engagement. And so some of our services span the entire spectrum around prevention, intervention, and re-engagement, and some land more in one category or another. But it's really how the Department of Multiple Pathways to Graduation has been organized. So currently we have 7. I will say also that the items on the slide that are in bold are our contracted schools. So that's another big piece of multiple pathways. Is multiple pathways, as people may know, is from birth to 21. So we're the only cohort that works with students with our teen parent program all the way at birth to when our kids age out and we launch them into hopefully post-secondary career prior to the age of 21. Within that, we have contracts. We have 7 charter schools. We have 5 district sponsored charter schools and 2 state sponsored charter schools. We have contracts with 9 contracted alternative schools, also known as our CBO schools. And then we have 5 mental health partnerships where we have worked with our students in day and residential treatment. So those are kind of, when we talk about our schools in multiple pathways, those are our schools. Some of the pieces where we really look at is how are our students doing, and how do we follow compliance and state statute with our students as they're leaving other school situations or they're moving to our districts as what we call late joiners. And so that there's some assistance needed to get our students where they need to be at all ages. One of the pieces of feedback as a district that we receive sometimes is like, Portland Public Schools is so big, where is your front door? So for families that are struggling, for students that are struggling, where is your front door? And so we work very closely with our enrollment and transfer office, but we also have started, in response to that question, is Reconnection Center and Reconnection Services, which you'll hear more about later this afternoon. So with that, I just want to provide that overview. Are there any questions or any comments before we go on to just the data?
I just want to say, Karina, I really appreciate that imagery of the front door and how we help people engage or find their way back, and that attention to sort of how do we make the relationship and engagement easier. So really appreciate that strategic thinking and that way of articulating it.
Thank you. One of the things as we plan out for the multiple pathways building, one of the things that we've heard consistently on the day is that we want people to really feel welcome when they come in, like you're coming into someone's living room. So we're really have a lot of intentionality around how that space is going to be welcoming and affirming to people. Kind of with that theme.
Yeah, I think as someone with positive school experiences, schools feel welcoming to me, but I know that they feel unwelcoming to others and also can feel institutional and daunting, some of our spaces. So it's lovely to think about that living room space to help families connect.
So last week, and here's our other focus, sorry. So within 3, we really talk about a theory of action. within multiple pathways to graduation around creating, as we were just talking about, culturally sustaining and nurturing environments that focus on the head, the hand, and the heart. So we know that there's too much sit and get in schools often, and so we wanted to see what are we doing to really engage like children in their whole physical bodies, and what kind of work can we do that's project-based or incorporate career technical education. And then instructional strategies that are focused on being culturally sustaining. And then a big emphasis, as people may know, around social emotional learning. So our work with social workers and counselors and our support teams, looking at how are we meeting students where they're at. And also just being really welcoming around what is it that we're learning from our communities of learners and their families. But that's really kind of how we're operating. And then the next piece is really on the data. So there were some questions about graduation data that came up recently. And one of the challenges in our alternate education system is that we have what we call, and there were some questions we all received around what is an accountable school and what isn't is a quote unquote non-accountable school. How does the Oregon Department of Education define schools? And then how does that play in or support our overall district work with our graduate portrait and our strategic plan? And so just sharing some information is that the Oregon Department of Education has what I just described. An accountable school is a school that kind of the easiest way that I remember it is it's a school for which the state of Oregon issues a report card. So as an example, all of our charter schools that Tara O'Neill supervises, they all have state report cards. And so the data around the metrics around academic growth, as well as like attendance and achievement or graduation data is all captured for our charter schools. It's all captured in our state report cards. For our comprehensive, for our focus, and within multiple pathways for MLC and for Alliance, they too receive they have a school issued ID by the district and they receive a state report card. For our contracted alternative schools, they don't receive a state report card because they're qualified as private alternative schools under statute. So there's actually March is a busy month. Every March there's a deadline for all of our schools to update their registration in Salem with our Office of Oregon Department of Education and as private alternative schools. So they complete the formal process to do that. However, they don't receive a state report card. So one of the things that happens when they don't receive a state report card is that at times their accomplishments are less visible. And so what we want to show you today is some of the impact that we know and are grateful for our collaboration and the success of our contracted alternative schools. What happens when a student leaves a comprehensive school, a focus school, or an in-district alternative school and goes to a CBO, if they complete from that CBO, then from that contracted alternative school, then the graduation, the last accountable school receives the credit for that graduation. So I'm not picking on any school. Our kids move all across the district, but just as one example, if the student left Cleveland and went to Benson and then left Benson and went to a contracted alternative school and graduated, Benson, in that example, is their last accountable school, so they would get the graduation credit for that. So it doesn't necessarily goes back to their neighborhood school, which was one of the questions I've heard in the last week. Questions about accountable schools or non-accountable schools?
Not for me at this point. Any of the other
Karina.
board members?
Nope, got it.
Thanks, I'm working on my wait time. So feel free to jump in anytime people have questions. So with regard to the data for 2021, what we have is that we have our 4-year graduation, our 4-year numbers. So the other thing that we have high school diplomas, which is high school graduation, and then we have completion rates, which is high school diplomas as well as students who receive a GED with high school completion. And so at Alliance this year, we had We had 48 students in 2021. We had 48 students complete and be in the cohort to receive their high school diploma. And we had, of the 5-year students, we have, if you include the 5-year graduation, high school graduates, there was 86. And if you include all the students that received that for this last year, this 5-year completion was incorporated 91 students. So the 5-year completion percentage for Alliance in last year's report card, as they were issued and released recently, was 72%. For MLC, MLC is a smaller setting, and MLC had 17 students graduate from high school last year. And so they had 17 students that added into their 4-year graduation as well as completion. But then when you look at the 5-year, which is a cohort prior, when you look at the 5-year graduation data, there were 25 students, as well as the 5-year completion, including students whose last accountable school was at MLC, there were 28. So when you look at the students who we know in alternative education often go into alternative education credit deficient, if we focus a little bit more on the 5-year completion rate versus the 4-year, which is a more appropriate measure for kids in alternative education, Alliance last year had a 5-year completion rate of 72, and MLC had a 5-year completion rate of 93. So when you look, so that is a big celebration. So when you look at that, and I don't have the comprehensive data on the slide, but when you look at our other 5-year completion rates, MLC is still on par with most of our other comprehensive and focus options around 5-year completion data. So I just add
Karina,
that frame. Yes.
this is Amy. I'm curious, do we see much traffic the other way around going from our alternative or our contracted schools back into our comprehensive high schools or our accountable high schools?
So I would say not very much, and Elise is going to give you some feedback and some data in a minute when she talks about Reconnection Services. But the answer to that is very few.
Okay, thanks.
People have a legal right to go. Students have a legal right to be served at their neighborhood school unless there is some specific circumstance around a disability that school doesn't offer. So as part of our practice always, we are always offering and providing that access to or help to facilitate a conversation or relationship back to neighborhood schools. But that's not often what our students are requesting. So then we'll look, I'm gonna hand it over to Erica in just a second, but then I'll just finish this slide. Then we look at our CBOs, this slide and the next. Then we look at our contracted alternative schools. And we had, and the 4-year metric again is a very, we live more in the 5-year metric or the 5 or 6-year metric. But with regard to 2021 data, we had 24 students, which is wonderful, get their high school diploma last year from a contracted alternative school. If we take diplomas and GEDs, we had 39 students. And then if we look at our 5-year graduates, high school diplomas, there was 177, and our number of students that are captured in our 5-year completion rate is 195 students. So of those 195 students, they would show up in other people's in an accountable schools data. And so just looking at the total, and it's even confusing in MPG because some of our schools are accountable and some of our schools in MPG are not accountable. And then there's DART, I didn't mean to miss DART. So our day and residential treatment schools. And that really varies because some of our treatment settings have students are not enrolled for a long period of time. And then we have other settings where students are enrolled for more than a year at times. But as you guys probably all know or might remember, in the pandemic of 2021, many families were not sending their students or the enrollment for having students across the state and across the nation, frankly, for students going into particularly residential treatment settings was very low. And so the numbers were low last year, but we happily had one 4-year graduate last year. And so
do we have documentation that shows a breakdown of from our CBOs where these students came? Like, is it going to be Tom? Is it going to be like a breakdown of that?
You are asking the perfect question because that is like 3 slides away.
Okay, fantastic. I'm gonna shut up.
You're good. No, it's a great question. So I just wanted to say before we leave this current slide is that last year for 2021, when we look at our students who have in multiple pathway schools who were captured in the data, we had 314 students that completed or graduated in a 4 or 5 year cohort. And what that equates to is the next. And so when we look at, there's often a thought of that kids and all, there are some people who are confused, and it is a confusing topic, but there are some people in the community or in other places that are confused with regard to like the investment in alternative education, as well as like, does it really support where the district's mission and vision is? And what we are able to quantify is this slide talks about the students for whom they graduated or completed from a CBO or a dark school. And so last year, 3.94% of our students, just under 4% of our students, finished at a contracted alternative school or day residential treatment school. And the overwhelming majority was a contracted alternative school. So that's the impact on our grad rate for the 4-year graduation rate. And then we have one for the 5-year as well. And so the impact last year on our 5-year rate was to raise it, and it's not just last year, it's every year. But last year's impact was just under, it was 4.48%, just under 4.5%. So in this way, we just want to share that, you know, this is how we are one system, we're one secondary system, we're one high school system. And so to answer your specific questions, I'm gonna hand it over to Erica, who's gonna go through specific pieces of data to just really break down what does that mean.
And skip to the next slide here, because here we're gonna give a little bit of a breakdown, and I'm a visual person, so we like tables because they kind of quickly give us a picture of the numbers that we're looking at. And so it's pretty self-evident, but this is kind of a breakdown of the grads and completers, and the grand total of students who, you know, are moving on to the next level in a different cohort rate. So it shows the 4th through the 9th year cohort rate. And as you can see, the overwhelming majority of students who graduated and completed last year were in that 5th year rate, which kind of aligns with what we know about students who enter our contracted alternative schools. And the next slide. Oh,
I'm gonna work on my data skills.
no, I didn't even know who was controlling this. And so this kind of gives a picture of, you know, which CBOs kind of the students came from. And so as you can see, this is showing the percentage of the graduates and completers from last year, which CBO was their last school.
So I think this gets at the question you were asking, Dr. Director Green.
This does, it speaks to the percentage, so.
And so obviously the size and scale of each of these programs is different as well. And so as you notice, PCC, we actually have Jeff Lapp here, the director of PCC Gateway and Yes to College program. So as you can see, there's a lot of graduates and completers, and that's one of our larger programs as well. And so while in some way it might look as though there's an inordinate amount of graduates and completers from one school, that could also be impacted by the scale of that. And of course, the wonderful work done by that program, not with this one. Okay, next slide. And so here is the information broken down by race. And so we have the various, these are grads and completers from the same graduation year. Just broken down in a pie chart to look at the demographics of that population. And then within the CBOs, we had 13 parenting students who graduated last year, which is exciting, and this is it broken down by race as well. So of those 13 students, this is the breakdown information. Yes,
So I have a question.
yes,
So given that we were at Helensview yesterday,
yes.
are the Helensview and saw their littles, are the Helensview littles in this data or not?
The Helensview team, you mean the parenting students are included, should be included in this number. I'll have to take a look at the chart, but it should be because it's from that other desk.
Okay.
So I think it should be. I'll double check that.
One of the reasons I'm specifically talking about Helensview is because they have a specific teen parent, child.
And sometimes their information it's in a different data system, so we have to make sure it's correlated with our data system. So sometimes it's we need to make sure that that's included. And the next slide just shows historically underserved versus non-historically underserved of the graduates from last year across our CBO network.
Do we have access to data that says what percentage of our CBO students as a whole that may not have graduated already or didn't get that chance are historically underserved and non-historically underserved?
I didn't hear. Sorry.
So current students, what do we have a data on current students if they're historically underserved or non-historically?
Oh, yes. So almost all the students are in our instance of Synergy and the dashboard, so that's very easy.
I would love to see kind of that data as well.
Absolutely, we can supply that. We can do like a current demographic kind of breakdown for next year.
That would be perfect.
And so the next slide kind of shows for the grads and completers from last year, historically underserved and non-historically underserved by specific school.
And hi everyone. Jonathan Garcia here, Chief of Staff. I did have a question, and I asked Director Wolf for in an email. But can you speak a little bit to looking at these numbers, for example? Let's look at Mount Scott or PCC as you see that they serve a larger or they're graduating a larger number of non-historically underserved. So just curious, for example, with Mount Scott, what's the kind of the process for the type of students that they would serve?
Go for it, and then I also just shared that, that I think at least this presentation will answer some of that too.
Absolutely, go ahead. So all of our CBO programs are open for all students who meet the eligibility criteria to enroll in alternative education. So there's no specific barrier for any particular student, of course, to enroll in any of the programs that best fit their needs. I would say that, there are certain programs that are located in certain geographic areas where it may be predominantly students of color and non-students of color. There could be trends in terms of that way. It could also be, just aspects of the community that, it could be based on a variety of factors, but the overall message is that no school is, of course, they try to include any student that wants to enroll. So, I'd say that probably there's a larger conversation that talks about a variety of aspects of culture and context and programming and location, feeding schools and all kinds of things like that, so.
I think it's also important to point out that PCC disproportionately serves white students, and therefore you see that reflected in their completion rate, likewise, Mount Scott.
And that would be true in what Director Oscar, student board, what is your exact title here?
Student representative.
Student representative, thank you, student representative Oscar. I think that will kind of show up in some of the data that we look at, because of course, this is only one slice of who's graduating, not a slice of the overall population that they serve. And so of course, if we looked at the population that they served and the population of students was more historically underserved and they're only graduating white students, then that would paint a different picture than if the population was reflected in the graduation data. So I think it's important to look at all those aspects together, which we do in our alternative accountability report card. We look much more closely at that kind of information.
Thank you so much.
We'll be happy to serve more racially diverse students from the district.
Thank you. And I think there have been intentional efforts, and I know this is something that's come up with charter schools as well. There are communities that are very well aware of the demographics of their population, and there have been a lot of efforts to try and make sure that that certain populations of students that are not represented within their student body, specific efforts targeting certain populations to ensure that they feel welcomed and wanted within those communities as well. And so, those are different for each school that we serve, but that's definitely true.
The only thing I would add to that is also enrollment periods. Like one of the things, again, that Helen's View spoke of yesterday when we were there was, their term is 3 weeks. So they're really trying to think about how are they catching students, and there's every school has different enrollment cycles or enrollment periods. So I think there are a variety of, like Erica said, a variety of factors in at least that.
And I'd say that's true not only for, distinctions between racial demographics, but also in terms of students with other, with specific needs. So we have young parents that tend to trend towards certain programs that have more diverse range of programming for young parents. And we have, so different CBOs serve different communities in a variety of different ways. The last slide was just simply a grad breakdown of last year based on the percentage of the cohort rate. So it's just another way to represent the graphs previously in here. So as you can see, 5th year grad rate and 6th year grad rate is very highly represented in our CBO network. Are there any questions on any of those charts or tables or thoughts?
I have a question, but I don't think it's not in regards to the graphs that we just saw, but more so it's in regards to our forecasting for the next year. In light of the numbers that we're seeing with students being out, students not, leaving school for various reasons, have we forecasted as to what the number of students that when we do start coming back may need to go to alternative school just so that they can get caught up because of what they missed in the traditional school model?
Glad you brought that up, and I'm looking at Jeff Leff here because he was one of the first people as we went into the pandemic who was actually thinking about this very topic, because I think he, as well as the rest of the CBO leaders, as well as the district, have really been trying to understand in a complex way, like what is happening to our students, especially those that are not feeling comfortable being back in school. And so trying to right size, the needs of our students with the programming that we have available. And so the short answer is yes, we have been doing a decent amount of forecasting and looking at trends, and also digging deeper into that data to really try and understand why our students, and this is true within our CBO network as well, their populations have previously been higher, but I think following trends across the district, enrollment has been down. But we know that's not an indicator necessarily of what's to come in the future, because as we know, many students over the past 2.5 years, have been missing a lot of school. And so we see, as we've always seen within our CBO network, doors open, but also wanting to make sure that we have the staff and the capacity and the facilities to meet the need and demands of the district and those particular students taking their services.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm looking at, because being at Helen's View one yesterday, which was absolutely amazing. And I am so grateful that we were able to get out there and to tour the school and to talk with the kids. I'm really concerned that as we start, some kids for various reasons, I'm concerned, will they be able to staff based on the potential number of kids that when they come back may be credit deficient for, again, various reasons. So I'm grateful that we're talking about it, that we're thinking about it. And I'm hopeful that as we continue to move forward, we will come up with solutions to these issues, because I know that it's something that we're all thinking about. So thank you for that.
I see, while our CBO network makes up kind of a series of schools that are supporting students with these intervention strategies, I think all of us really look at it, as Karina mentioned, as part of our kind of overarching high school system. And these schools fit within the intervention strategy of our entire district. We have various factors within our comprehensive high schools also that are part of that intervention system. So whether that's our SIT teams or, there's a variety of different things that are available for students within our comprehensive system. And the CBOs are just a part of that overarching system. So I think it's important to not look at it as a standalone, but rather as part of that overarching kind of strategy.
And I think I would add, this is where I think Eric and I tend to collaborate a lot, her overseeing the CBO network and me overseeing Reconnection Services. I mean, just this week, wanting to pull data to take a look at how many of our 9th, 10th, and 11th graders are off track. When will we see a significant impact from the pandemic and credit deficiency? And I know the district-wide is also looking at that, wanting to intervene as early as possible, because we know that the more that students move around, their chances of completing high school often go down. And so if we have significant credit deficiency and other issues showing up, what can we do at their home school to make sure that they catch up as well? So Eric and I collaborate a lot in forecasting and looking at how the needs are coming down the pipe.
And I would just add, going back to a previous slide, is that that's part of where we look at like our credit recovery system. And so one of the questions that we're asking is, how are we in the pandemic? Like how are we providing services both through virtual scholars, as well as in Portland Union scholars? And that is not just in our in-district schools, that also is district-wide. I don't know if you want to add anything.
And Karina, I think that's a really interesting point for us to look at when we're sort of prioritizing our federal funds on some of this additional work we can do coming out of the pandemic, and to really see how we can support our contracted alternative schools to do things differently, because we've seen their success in terms of credit recovery. And we know, to Director Green's point, that we have a lot of kids who are in that boat now. And so, how are we going out of our way to help them find their way to those services? Because they're different than what they might be able to access if they're still in their comprehensive high schools. So I'd be interested in hearing more about that as we start to talk more about our summer programming.
Yeah.
And our with our federal funds.
Absolutely. I think it's you guys are, what I'm hearing you name is both things, that it's a both and. So how are we looking at our alternative system? Often students that choose a smaller environment with intention. And so how are we bolstering that, like now and in the future? And then also, what are the interventions we're doing district-wide to help all students regardless of where they're at? And I think those are both valid, great identifiers and pieces of work that we're working on. I think one of the other pieces in answer to some of your data questions is, we're really excited. We often have, and Director Constant, you have knocked on doors for many years. We often have had Reconnection Services and student re-engagement work. And so we really wanted to look at that and provide for you an update on Reconnection Services. And so Dr. Elise Huggins has lots of doctors in the house, we're really fortunate that she leads our Reconnection Services work. And so is providing a presentation on current work that is really relevant to some of the questions you all were just raising.
Thanks. I'll just tell a small story, because I'm married to a physician, and when my children were little, my oldest daughter used to say, "My mom's a doctor too, but she doesn't help people." So I'm not used to being called that name, although my husband is. If we could go ahead and go to the next slide. I thought I would start out just by providing a little bit of a context around the push and pull factors of school disconnection, just to anchor us in the work that I think the CBO network does, as well as Reconnection Services, which I see as kind of the bridge to that network. So when we look at data and research on dropouts, as well as we look at the population within PPS, we can kind of lump students into two categories. There are those that get pulled out of school, so they need to work, they need to parent, maybe something's happened at home and they got to step away from school. And what we see with this population is that it's a very rational cost-benefit decision that the student and the family are making. And that for these students, they are more likely to return, and when they return, they are more likely to complete with a diploma. The other bucket of students are those that we talk about or sort of label as being pushed out of school. And here is where we see the nature of the school may be a poor fit for that student. There may be a student may show a poor sense of belonging. There may be academic issues coming up. We see the disproportionate rates in discipline, lack of engagement, and a general sort of cultural incongruence. And for these students, they are less likely to return. And when they do, they are more likely to complete with a GED. In Reconnection Services, and I think in our CDO network, we are working with both of these populations. And the alt schools, in district alt schools as well. We are all working with both profiles of students in our population. And I think this also helps to frame a little bit of how Reconnection Services approaches the work. Go ahead.
And so this, I will just say, in addition to this, we also have students who are choosing a smaller setting. So these are the primary reasons that research continues to say, and then there's also just students who choose a smaller setting.
Thank you. Yeah. So Reconnection Services, I like to sort of think of or frame as one of the cornerstones of PPS's dropout prevention and recovery. And at the very basic level, we connect youth with alternative educational options. And those are the CBO network as well as our in-district. But I think at a deeper level, the work that we are doing with students and families is really around restoring their hope in the institution of education, helping students to reimagine themselves as worthy and capable of school success, and then reconnecting them to a best fit school. It is not just a sort of referral and placement process. We have students who carry a certain amount of trauma with them from their experiences in their current schools that we help to support and address in the process of helping them re-engage in the school. So students are referred to Reconnection Services because they're perceived to have disengaged or are in the process of disengaging from the school. And my staff support the student and the family explore and access options. So to questions earlier, that can include maintaining a student's enrollment in their current school. So a Cleveland student will get referred to us. The first thing we will ask is, do you want to stay at Cleveland? And if that's the case, then we work to support re-engagement at Cleveland for that student. It could mean enrollment or re-enrollment in the neighborhood school. So perhaps there's a student who stepped away from Cleveland again for several years or months or weeks. We will re-enroll and support the re-engagement back in Cleveland. Or it could mean enrollment in one of our district alternative schools or our contracted alternative schools. So before we go down there, a few more facts kind of about Reconnection Services in our caseload. So on average, Reconnection Services serves 1,000 to 1,200 middle and high school students per year. I have a staff of 6 outreach coordinators, so that amounts to about 250 students per outreach coordinator by the end of the year. So our students are referred continually across the year from August 1st to when we close it out at the end of June. A student is referred and put on an outreach coordinator's caseload and stays on their caseload for the entire year. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a bit. Students, let's see. The majority of referrals are made to us by PPS school staff and CDO staff, although anybody can submit a referral, including a student themselves. Community member, JCC, probation officer, anybody can submit a referral. It's on our website and it's an online referral. Then there are additional students that we work with that are not reflected in our caseload of about 1,000 to 1,200 students per year. There are students that we daily, my outreach coordinators are consulting the school staff around. There are outreach campaigns that we collaborate with our high schools around supporting and just doing general outreach, as well as our summer outreach lists that we collaborate with high schools at the end of the year to come up with a list of students that may need some attention over the summer. So we can move to the next slide. See if I can pull it up here for myself. So there are two sides of the Reconnection Services house. There's Reconnection Services, which is really our referral-based re-engagement services, where we connect our youth to alternative educational options in district and CDO. As I said, I have 6 outreach coordinators, and they are embedded in our comprehensive and in-district alternative schools. They spend time there during the week. They are members of the student intervention teams. They have relationships with school staff in the buildings. So on this side of the house, 6 outreach coordinators, a school social worker, 0.5 FTE, and a data analyst. On the other side of the house is the Reconnection Center, which is a program. It's a place co-located at Alliance of Kenton High School. And I sort of frame the Reconnection Center as a re-engagement on-ramp. Students get placed at the Reconnection Center by outreach coordinators. It's a temporary part-time opportunity up to about 12 weeks. And for about half a day, 4 days a week. Outreach coordinators would bring students here who maybe they're awaiting an enrollment period. So MEEC, Alliance at MEEC, has very specific enrollment times. So if a student, we want to get a student engaged more quickly, we'll bring them to the Reconnection Center while we're waiting for MEEC enrollment to start. Or it could be a student who really hasn't quite figured out the next step, and we want to do some deeper work with that student. And then there are those students who could use a lot of wraparound support and barrier removal before we even get to the point of having a conversation about the next school of enrollment. The program is designed to prepare students for success in high school. We use a strengths and relationship-based approach with our students. So in the Reconnection Center, I have 5 shared teachers with Alliance at Kenton, so about 2.5 FTE, a school social worker, and 0.5 of a school counselor. Okay. The general nuts and bolts about around how to access Reconnection Services and how we work. It's an online referral that gets submitted. An outreach coordinator will be assigned and will reach out to the family within 48 hours. We know that for many of our families, they've not had the best experience. And so we really are trying to reframe that narrative for them and be very responsive when we receive a referral. An outreach coordinator will then spend some time in Synergy, doing some research. They might reach back out to the person who referred to learn as much information as possible about the student. There'll be an intake meeting where we gather more info and we begin to discuss options. And then together with the family, we will explore options. We'll support folks through the enrollment and application process if that is needed. And we will identify a best fit school. And then the last piece, which I think is really important, is, as I mentioned, those students stay on our caseload for the entire year. So we are circling back and making sure that they are sticking and finding success where they are. So another important piece or benefit of coming through Reconnection Services, as opposed to having a family take a student directly to an alternative setting, is that there is some additional support that we can provide. Before I go into data, I guess just stop there to see if anybody has any questions about Reconnection Services, how we operate. And then I can share some data as well. Maybe I'm doing a good job. Okay, here we go, some data. So I think what's important to take away from this side, so this is sort of our monthly referral rates. It's 4 years of monthly referral rates. And I'll have another, sorry, I'm trying to get to my notes here. I wanted to point out, oh, they're gone. Oh, there they are. Okay. So these are referral rates across four years. I think that some things that stand out to me on this slide is taking a look at the red bar, which represents the 2019-20 school year, the year we shut down. You can see there's a significant decrease in referrals after March, after we shut down. The other thing that stands out is the green bar, which represents last year during CDL. And you can see, looking across every single month, that our referral numbers last year were much lower than pre-pandemic times. You can also look at the purple bar, which represents this year, and you can see that the rate of referrals is back up to pre-pandemic times. The rollover piece, we close out caseloads at the end of the year, and outreach coordinators, we've used different criteria from year to year, but generally there's a who should we roll forward kind of conversation, and outreach coordinators identify a subset of students that they want to roll over to the next year. Maybe those are students whose connection is still pretty tenuous. Maybe they're students that have just disengaged or just been referred, and so there's more work to be done. So if you go to the next slide, it's another version of that data, but you can see the arc of our caseloads. So the y-intercept is our rollover start point. So we've had different numbers of students rolled over, but the general arc is about the same. You can see the yellow line, which is last year, and how much lower our referral numbers were last year. And looking at the green line, which is this year, we're seeing a very similar trajectory. And my analysis of the data is that we're back sort of in terms of caseloads to pre-pandemic kind of numbers. Any questions there? I'll keep going.
No, this is so absolutely amazing. I just want to say thank you. I'm definitely going to want to sit with you again, so that I can go through this data again. And I love this. Thank you. Keep going.
I'd be happy to sit with you. So when we look at our caseload, there is a clear overrepresentation of students of color in the Reconnection Services caseload. On average, students of color represent about 55 to 60%, 65% of our caseload, but are only about 44% of the district's demographics. So students of color are overrepresented in our caseload. When you look here, it's a little more specific, and we can look at exactly what populations, and we can see that there are 3 racial ethnic groups that are 100% overrepresented in Reconnection Services data, and that includes our Black students, our Native American students, and our Latino students are 100% overrepresented. So Black students are 8.5% in the district demographics, and they're 16% in our population. Likewise, you see 16 for Latino and about 30 in our population, and 0.5 for our Native students, and 1.6% in our population. Moving forward, we also see a slight overrepresentation of male students in our Reconnection referrals, and an overrepresentation of special education students. The district average for special education is about 15%, and 25% of the students working with Reconnection Services are eligible for special education. what else can I add? So this last slide represents some of the data that we are part of a national network of re-engagement centers that is coordinated by the National League of Cities. And these are some of the data points that we provide annually to the National League of Cities. The blue bar is sort of students that are referred into us. The red bar are students that have completed an intake. The yellow bar are the students that are enrolled or maintained enrollment. And the green bar are students that persist for 6 months. I think a few things that I would point out here, you can see that I think our stick rate, our persistence rate has improved over the years. And that's evident by the yellow and green bars getting closer and closer in height. Let's see, what else would I point out here? And it's important, I think, to, in terms of the re-engagement rate, we want to be held accountable for the students for whom we really have an opportunity to re-engage. And those are the ones who complete an intake. Let's see.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I noticed, that so when I look at this graph from a visual perspective, which is again amazing, I definitely want to connect with you. The contacted, meaning that at some point we've spoken to them about it, and well, they've been talking to us, they've been like referred, but then actually from completed the actual intake, the gap between those two seems to be it's going up and down. And it looks like in 2019, it got much worse, where a lot of the kids didn't complete or a lot of the individuals, participants didn't complete the actual intake, but the ones that you actually worked with, you were actually able to work with. So this, I just want to say this is good, but that was something that I noticed.
Yeah. And let's sit down with you and me and Donnie Deschler, who's our data analyst, who really has her fingers in on these charts. She's the one who pulls all this data. And there are lots of things that impact some of what you're commenting on. And I would want to make sure to get you a comprehensive understanding. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. And again, I just want to say thank you for the work that's being done, because it's this type of work, this type of tracking that allows us to see exactly where we're hurting. And once we know where we're hurting, then we can begin to focus on what we need to do to change that hurt. So I'm extremely excited about this data that I'm looking at.
Awesome. So I wanted to personalize the data for you a little bit. On the next slide, you'll see a profile of one of the students that we've worked with, Beja. I think rather than read all of the details about Beja that are on the slide, I think y'all can take a look on your own. But I want to point out the multi-year engagement. Beja was referred to us back in, 2018? And she was rolled over twice. She was connected, then disconnected, connected, then disconnected. And because of our follow-up support and because of the intense attention of Sharday Dennis, who was her outreach coordinator.
That's Miss Paula's daughter.
That's Miss Paula's daughter, yes.
I've known her whole life. That's awesome.
So we were able to get, and with the assistance of Lorna over here, who was the principal at Meek, able to get Beja to the finish line, and she graduated from Meek and is now enrolled at Lane Community College and focusing on business. And then
this is absolutely amazing. Thank you. Yeah, and I love the personal touch here because it's when you're working with data, it's so easy to get caught up in the numbers and not realize that there are lives attached to each and every one of those numbers, and that there's a story attached to each and every one of those numbers. And so to be able to bring it back to the real life touch of this and what your work really means and why your work is so important is something that I feel like we should be doing in each and every one of our, when we're having these types of data-driven meetings, that we bring it back to the students and the families that we're doing this for. And so again, kudos.
Thank you. And I think the other piece is to point out, you know, for Beja is she was impacted by the community violence that we are experiencing over the last 18 months. I mean, these are the students that Reconnection Services and our alternative schools are working really hard to support and to create a different experience for. And so I agree with you. It's really important to put a face to those numbers. The last thing I want to just point out or speak to is how we've been trying to adapt during the pandemic. So a couple of places, we've tried to increase our visibility. We've redesigned our website. We have PSAs running on the Numbers FM this year. We've updated posters and postcards, and we're trying to get those out around town, as well as some swag sweatshirts, and getting those out to students. We also last year collaborated with high schools around a summer outreach campaign, worked with them to identify students who they felt like they lost connection with, and spent the summer reaching out to those families and reconnecting them either to their high school or to an alternative setting if needed. We did a new fall outreach campaign. So Karina spoke to the door knocking, and what we did this year in lieu of a sort of door knocking campaign was collaborate with our student attendance coach teams and to really identify the students who are no-showed at the beginning of the year. These are students who are enrolled in the school but don't show up. And we took that list and whittled it down, and then did a phone banking campaign and porch visits and postcards to those families. So we started with a list of just under 1,000 students, and I think we got it down to about 89 students who we didn't have an outcome for, meaning we didn't know that they landed at a different school, and those students went on our caseload, and we are continuing to do outreach to them. And then the last thing, hopefully, is a February communications campaign about options. And hopefully, if COVID cooperates, a re-engagement event at the end of the month to try to get information out to the community about all the amazing alternative settings that are available to families. Okay, now then.
You could have went on for days and kept my attention.
That was great.
Thank
you.
It really was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elisa. And we really, these students don't get enough attention, and this incredibly personal work that your team doesn't get enough attention. So really appreciate it. And it's wonderful to hear the success stories as well, like Beja.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think one of the pieces that's really good for our learning as a district and as a system is, as Elise talked about, is that we've been part of the National Reengagement Network for about 8 years, and it's really lovely. It's a lovely opportunity to actually learn from other leaders in other districts around what's happening year to year, and particularly now in the pandemic. But what are other people doing? Where are other people around the country finding success, and what are other strategies? So it's been a real important partnership for us as a system and as a district to be a part of. And I will say also that another person who works really wonderfully with us is Dunya Manu and her team. And so really looking at how are we, one of the things that we you asked a question earlier, Director Green, around making sure that we have enough space or enough services. And I think one of the things that we continue to monitor in our data is lots of different slices, but it's also our students in the middle grades. So one of the things that we have, where are we coming up against tensions, is one of the places that we have need and we have some tension is around what are the different alternative opportunities for students in middle school whose neighborhood school or whose current school placement they've not been successful at. So there are still different pieces where we're still learning and growing as a system and thinking about how can we do better.
I just want to say thank you guys. You guys did, and it's such important work that I think we so often don't focus on, and it's really great to hear kind of the success we've been able to say students who aren't engaged. Here's a way where we can come and say, what do you need, and how can we facilitate that environment and help that. So really just want to say thank you guys.
I want to say a thank you to Elise for personalizing it as well, because, you know, when we do look at this high level data, it is really important to realize the impact that this work has on so many people, right? And we look at the numbers of graduates, and the one story that you pointed to, right, times 100, right, times 500, right, or 1,000, really just goes to show how broad reaching the services are. So it's exciting. I needed this little pick me up today.
I'll just say that I have an amazing team, and it's a joy. It's a joy to work with them. They are very passionate, and they share many experiences with the students that they serve, and that was intentional in our sort of hiring. Yeah, all the success goes to my amazing team of outreach coordinators and teachers and social workers. So thank you.
And they're amazing here. So our next topic is public comment, and I don't know if we have any public comment. Give me a second. Okay. That concludes that comes to the end of our agenda items.
Okay, so if that concludes the agenda items and there is no public comment, when is our next scheduled committee meeting?
Yeah.
While she's looking that up, to my other directors that are on the line, as well as to my my student rep, do either of you or any of you have any closing remarks before we transition?
I do not. This is Director Constam. Thank you so much, and take care, everybody.
Thank you too.
Thank you, everyone, and another great committee. So thank you.
Director Ailey?
Just
Thank
thank you, everybody. And I just saw a message that our next meeting is March 2nd.
March 2nd. All right. Well, with that being said, our next meeting is scheduled for March 2nd. I want to personally thank everyone that has come out today. I want to thank everyone for all the reports. I want to thank you for all the information that you shared, the hard work that you've put into this. I also want to, for those that are watching, thank you for taking the time to sit in, because that just shows that this is important, just as important to you as it is for all of us. And I appreciate everyone's time. With that being said, this meeting is adjourned.